Hey everybody, welcome to this section of BGP Bootcamp. In this section, we are doing the advanced topic. So let's continue and let's focus on the next topic in the advanced section, which is called as understanding and configuring BGP Private AS. Okay, so we'll talk about what is BGP Private AS. It's a very simple thing and how to configure it and how to use that. Okay, the most important thing is how to use this Private AS configuration in your BGP deployment. Now, there can be situation where any customer, they want to run BGP into their own edge routers or might be the edge devices, right? Which could be a firewall, which could be any sort of layer 2 device. So a customer, let's say they want to run this particular BGP process onto their edge device, and this customer says that, hey, I want to advertise certain routes into my BGP process, whether I'm running internally, let us say some IGP, and I want to redistribute those routes into BGP, and I want to advertise this to my service provider. Okay, so between the service provider and the customer, you are running an eBGP neighborship. But the whole point is, the customer should not buy any sort of autonomous system, right? Do you have this implementation running? So what IANA, what they have done is they have introduced the concept of private autonomous system, which a customer like a private IP address space, the private autonomous system in BGP space can be used as free and without any charge. So the private AS range that we have is the private autonomous system range that we have. It is from 64,512 all the way to 65535. Now any AS number that falls between this range are considered as private AS range, and that can be deployed into the customer environment as free of cost or free of any charges. Right, that's what we have here. Let's say we focus between this service provider, which is running on AS 800, which is R8. So this is my SP over here, and let's say this is going to be R12, which is acting as a customer. On the side of this customer, let's say customer ABC is one of the site is on R12, and the customer wants that, hey, I've got some networks behind the scene, and I'm running some sort of IGP over here, let's say EIGRP as an example, and I want to advertise into those eBGP. I mean to say I run eBGP neighborship between the customer and the SP, and I want to advertise those my local routes which is running in EIGRP process, redistribute that into your BGP process so that the service provider router can learn about the customer routes, customer internal routes, and propagate those routes to the other BGP domain, right? So might be you want to advertise this to the public internet, for example. Now the whole idea is, how do you deploy that? So let's say we have got this customer which is R12, and it is running on a private AS which is 64, but between that range, right? 64512 all the way to 65535. So any AS number that falls between that range, it is called as a private AS. And you notice over here 645012, it is part of that range. Likewise, we have another router which is R11, thinking as a customer ABC but a different site. It is also running on this particular private AS range. So let's focus on between R8 and R12 configuration. Now what we'll do is we'll configure this private AS configuration on this R12, advertise. Let us see, we've got a loopback network over here. I believe we have a loopback 0 for R12 as 112.1.1, and we'll advertise this network into the BGP process. So basically we will run eBGP neighborship between this customer router R12 and with this service provider router R8, and advertise this loopback network of 112.1.0/24, and we will do that with the configuration of private autonomous system. So let's go ahead and do that. So first thing first, let's take up a notepad as usual, and we will define the task. So we will say that the task is basically configuring BGP private autonomous system. Okay, all right, where AS might be for most of you. Okay, let's say it's autonomous system, which is also called as AS. Yeah, all right. So The first thing first is task number 1. So what we'll do is we'll configure eBGP pairing between customer, which is R12, and service provider, which is basically R8. Okay, we'll form an eBGP pairing over here. The whole important thing is the customer should use the AS, which is basically 65012, as the should use AS as the private AS number. Okay, that's a task. So what we'll do is we'll go and first of all check that on R12 what configuration we have. So if I see here show run section router, I don't have any routing protocol configured over here. If you see show IP interface diff, already I've got a couple of loopbacks over here, and it is running a physical interface IP on 80.12. Likewise, R8 should also have, you know, a link on 80.8. So show IP interface diff, I have 80.8 over here. So definitely R8 can be reachable to R12. So let's talk to 192.1.80.12 and should be reachable, and it is reachable. Okay, so we can form eBGP neighborship between R8 and R12. So over R8 what we'll do is we'll go and configure the basic eBGP commands. So over to R8 we'll say router BGP my AS is 800, that's on the service provider, and we'll say neighbor, which is 192.1.80.12, and it is running on remote AS, which is basically 65012. That's my private AS. And likewise on R12 we will say router BGP my AS would be 65012, and my neighbor is R8, which is 192.1.80.8, and that neighbor is running on AS 100. That's my service provider AS, and I want to advertise my loopback, which is 1.12.1.0 followed by the mask keyword of /24 into this BGP process. Right, so let's go and copy this to R8 first. So going to R8, global config mode, paste the eBGP config. Sorry, there we go. So the neighborship commands are configured here, and let's go to R12 and paste the config respectively. So over to R12, global config. Done. So let's wait for the eBGP neighborship to come up, and what will happen is the neighborship is up, and R12, because of my network statement, will advertise this loopback network into the BGP process. So if I see show IP BGP, over here you can see 112.1.0 is advertised locally, right? And R8 should learn that network. So going to R8, my service provider should learn that loopback network of 1.12.1.0. So do show IP BGP summary. I have a neighborship with 80.12, looks good, and do show IP BGP, and here we go. I have received this network, which is 112.1.0/24 from R12. That's from the customer. That's my eBGP next hop, and this is coming from this AS, which is 65012, and that is running on a private AS. That's fine so far. Okay, so R8, my service provider, came to know the route that I'm trying to advertise, and it came to know that I'm using a private AS number. But what R8 does is R8 will propagate that particular route to its BGP neighbor. So in my case, R8 is having an eBGP neighborship to R4, and this is all your public domain. right? So let's go to R4 and see what R4 is learning. So if I see show IP BGP over here, I can see R4 have learned regarding the customer route. It came from its eBGP neighbor, which is R8. But a bad thing over here is this public router, it's learning that, okay, this route that was originated, it was originated by a private autonomous system. So in a public domain, make sure that, this is not a good thing, right? So in a public BGP domain, your public routers should not be aware about any routes that is originated in your private autonomous system. Okay, now how do you actually fix that? So it's a very simple command which is used to fix it, but it's a very, very important thing, right? So when your customers' routes are getting advertised by the service provider should not advertise the customer private AS to its neighbors. Okay, that means if I go to R8 over here, R8, you can see that if you see do show IP BGP, as I've shown you earlier as well, it is learning that route. But when R8 forwards that to R4, which is my public router over here, it is learning that particular private AS. So to eradicate that, what I need to do is on R8, I'll say that, hey, whenever you are forwarding any routes, any BGP routes to your neighbor, which is R4, ensure that you remove this private autonomous system IDs in your advertisements. It's a simple command, but it's a very, very healthy command in your BGP deployment. Okay, so let's go to the process over here. So what we'll do is we will go to task number 2. We'll say that configure R4 such that sorry, not R4, it's R8. Configure R8 such that it removes the private AS number from the AS path before propagating the route towards the public internet. Okay, so what we'll do is we'll go to R8. It's a very simple thing. So we'll say router BGP my AS 800. But so it's a simple command, but it's a very powerful command. So the thing that you do not know, it's a single command, but a very helpful command. If you know it, it will make your life very easy. So BGP 800, it'll say neighbor 192.1. I believe it is 48.4. 48.4. A simple command called as remove -private -as. Okay, so let's copy this particular command and we will go and paste it on this router, which is R8. So over to R8 on the global config mode, I've informed that, hey, whenever I'm advertising anything to this BGP neighbor, I'll remove the private AS configuration and we'll do clear IP BGP star soft. We'll clear the BGP process. Now if you see here, do show IP BGP, I should get my R12, my customer route. That's fine. But if I'm forwarding that to R4, my private AS should be removed. So if I go to R4 and if I see show IP BGP, now I see that I'm receiving 112.1.0, but notice I'm not able to see any private AS, right? So I believe that this particular route has been originated from my neighboring ISP or my neighboring SP itself, right? And in that case, I'm keeping my customer route safe and secure. Good. So I hope it is understandable to everybody. It's clear. Please practice the same. I'll see the next lecture with a very similar concept of private AS called as a local AS, and we'll see how to configure that. Okay, so thank you for watching. See me in the next video. Thank you.